This is the Daily Practice podcast with Crystal Borelli
and Andrea Hellman.
Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om.
Well, again, we have Julia McCabe on the podcast with us today. Thank you, Julia, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's so exciting. Who would like to ground us down?
I'll take this one. All right, so if you're in a place to close your eyes, close your eyes. Otherwise, just bring an awareness into your breathing. From the outer layer of your body, allow yourself to become a bit more relaxed. And then take notice, or especially around your eyes, and brighten around them. The space around your heart and your chest. And then go down to your belly. Notice if you're holding and restricting inwards, can you relax that space just a little bit more? And I'll have you take a nice full belly breath in. So fill your belly up. Allow your breath to rise up towards your upper lungs. Part your lips at the very top and slowly release out the breath. I'm going to do that again. So fill up your belly all the way up to your upper lungs. The pause and suspension at the top. And then part your lips and offer a breath out that's soft and sweet, even grounding. And again, I'm a sucker for my own medicine, so I've already launched. So I'll ask you to come on back. If your eyes are closed, you can open them up. And here we are.
Oh,
Just like that, 2 breaths and
then it's all it takes.
And I'm
sometimes.
gone. I know.
I'm done.
Well, it's a practice, right?
Yeah.
Like you refine it.
One thing that I thought was really interesting last week was you were talking about belief bias, and I'm kind of obsessed with bias because when people talk about negative bias, like how if you get a little bit of negative feedback, how it affects you at like 6 times the rate or something as something like positive. And so I just want to know about all the biases, or what are like the most interesting ones in your work with neuroscience.
Oh yeah, there's a lot. I mean, in terms of the subject that I'm studying right now is neuroscience and society, but then my actual research and paper that I'm writing is on what, like how conspiracy theories go awry and what has happened, like the neural correlates that are related to when people believe that on a date that a spaceship is that's kind of like implausible explanation of what could happen if, the world's going to end, UFOs are going to pick you up at this date. And then looking at what happens when they're disappointed. There's this fascinating study that was done in and around that time. It's called the May 21st study, if you want to Google it. When we are typically in a state of fear, anxiety, or duress, we are in our stress response system. And when we're in our stress response system, that puts us in a vulnerable window to be able to, basically we're vulnerable to information coming in, including false information that we don't know that is false. So even when individuals, when they're presented with confounding information, so someone who deeply believes that on a date, alien or UFO is going to pick them up on a date because the world's going to blow up on a certain day, even if they then are presented with the next day when they're still alive and they're presented with this information that is conflicting with this deep-seated belief that they've had for a year or 6 months or what have you, there's almost like a protective, our brain on a neurological level doesn't want to believe it because it requires energy to then have to relearn a whole new belief again. So that's why when someone, even if it seems implausible, the worst thing that you can say to them is, that's completely wrong. You're an idiot. You don't think that way. Why, putting someone down to believe in something is not a good approach. It's the best approach is listening to everybody's aspects, even if it seems implausible. And then there's plausible conspiracy theories, right? So there's almost like this sliding scale of conspiracy. For example, Watergate back in the 60s with Nixon, right?
It was a while ago.
That was considered a conspiracy theory, and then it was found to be true. So then there are ones that are considered to eventually there's truth that comes from that. But looking at, when someone is in that state of deep belief, and then the disappointment and the shame and all of that. So there's in terms of the answer to belief bias, that's what I'm currently steeped in, is looking at why it is that we resist incoming information. And really, like when we look at the most recent contentious one of people, pro and against the V word vaccine, right? And then the collision of interests and
the fear, like that's the first thing I came up. I'm like,
Yeah.
this sounds like COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, the whole thing that went down. It's like bring in fear, bring in all these things, and then people question it. But it's you just explained the last couple of years.
Yeah, and that I think that anytime we're in a fear state and we aren't doing things to ground us, we are vulnerable, but we have to remember that our brain and our nervous system is vulnerable to any kind of incoming information that is, in a way, like a quick hit. Even if we aren't presented supportive evidence, we'll believe something that is kind of, it makes sense in that moment, and it's this window, this vulnerable window, and it fulfills really our desire to control things. And there's this desire in our nervous system our brain is constantly trying to make sense of the world, and it's trying to constantly feel safe. And so when we're seeking safety, we will believe something initially that might come in right away. And so that's where, on both sides, and I hate using the word term sides, because I just think that where we've made the mistake is just being able to be at comfort with all sides and all, I'm a double vaccinated person, but then my best friend had a stroke because of a vaccine, and I was fully all pro, not to get on the vaccine topic, but, I was fully pro for it. And then that happened, and he's now debilitated for who knows how long. And so, and it was public health that actually officially said, yeah, it's because you had the Pfizer vaccine 2 weeks ago. And so, but I was open to all of it, and so it's just, I believe that's an example of that all sides matter. And that, I think everyone's so sick of talking about that. But in general, I think the lesson moving forward is that division and divisiveness is not the solution, because it puts us into that fear state that also taxes our nervous system, that then puts us in a vulnerable place for many things, including misinformation or just shut down, judging, all that.
It's like a lifeline. Like if you're in that fear state, then whatever comes in, you're like, oh, that's a lifeline. I'm going to jump onto that, because that truth, even though it might not be true, is going to save me pretty much. Like I can attach onto that, and I'm going to defend that to the fucking end. It's like they call it, they decided, what was it? The WEF, they said it was biohacking. They're like, oh, we figured out how to do it. Anyways, carry on.
I think it would be irresponsible though not to talk about it. Like I don't like saying, oh no, we can't talk about COVID, and it's like, well, you kind of do have to talk about it, or it's just gonna happen again, or I never felt like I was super pro. One of my good friends has done 2 different university sciences, and she was like, I think we just felt depleted. Like, what is our other option? Like, we kind of have to roll the dice. I think we always felt like we were just like rolling the dice, and that we felt like we didn't have options. Kind of just believed in the hope that, like, believed in us as like people trying to take care of each other versus, I don't know.
And let's admit it. If there is a test to test us as, whatever, almost 8 billion and probably counting, or, nearing 8 billion, we failed.
We miserably
failed.
I didn't trust the people.
And I just think, I just think that in terms of, but by that I mean we failed the test of something, and I hate to say it, of something probably worse that's going to happen, of unity and acceptance. And mind you, it's ridiculous, our population now. So to get all 8 billion people on board to an idea or concept is ridiculous to ask of everybody. But we haven't even gotten into the inequalities and inequities of our planet, and people who don't even have their primary needs, which, basically accounts for 80% of our planet right now. So I think that's, a massive issue. And that's where I just, I wish that all of the leaders that I sat down before UN meetings or WHO meetings or, governmental meetings and sat down. I know this sounds so kitsch and so hippie to say, but sat down and did some fucking breath work, and sat together and connected as human beings, not as pompous assholes for most part.
Yeah. Well, you kind of just,
like just, and and I hate to say it, but it's, oh gosh, I'm going to go off on a feminist rant here.
I like it. It's probably our
But
demographic.
if I was to say, somebody was just murdered, or I hate to say it, but our mind goes immediately to a man, or when you think about political leaders, what do they count for? 90% of, maybe growing a little bit more, but in terms of leaders in politics, sciences, maths, in a way, that's why I got into science, because there aren't enough women in science or all genders in science, so it's just big old sigh.
No, keep going. Yeah.
I just think that I think that and I feel for men as well. I just listened to a spectacular podcast, Dax Shepard and
Julia and I are big fans of Dax.
I love
Dax
Dax.
Shepard. He's amazing.
Yeah.
He interviewed Scott is it Galloway, Professor Galloway?
So, yeah.
Who did a talk on men and boys and how they're facing a crisis, and it is so on point. What he says in that podcast was. He couldn't, and he was so professional and so not one-sided, but just the crisis facing boys and men.
Well, I think it's that whole pendulum concept too, right? Like affirmative action, all that, like boom, you did it. I think a lot of good came from it, but now you really need to think about not just like bringing that pendulum all the way over, because then it creates a lot of inequality in a different area.
Yes,
like you
exactly.
need to like slowly bring it out, or like bring everybody up, so it's which I think is kind of his thing, right? It's like be there for the boys and helping these men.
Yeah, and that's why I love when I have men come into my programs or men who are doing my stuff online. It's I'm so happy because I just think, yes, thank you for being a leader in this and not being afraid of it, because some. And I don't want to speak binary here, but I think a lot of men still, in the maybe older generations are still, like this, this frou-frou, like, it's not going to work, or, and just brush it off, and like 40 plus year olds. But there's still a lot of attitude around these wellness practices.
So last week when you had the I did list, I was told to write a stop doing list. Like things I'm going to stop doing.
That's a good one.
Yeah. What would be on yours?
Over striving.
Oh, that's a good one. One of the coping techniques. So how are you going to cope, or how are you going to regulate yourself so you don't need to strive?
I'll strive to not strive.
Why do you think you strive? Because I find like labeling gets hard too, because I'm like, are you really striving, or are you the product of two teachers and you're just constantly curious? I don't know.
Yeah. The product, I like that you remembered my parents are both teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, my dad wasn't much of a striver. My dad cruised.
Was he the shop teacher? What was he teaching?
No, my dad was, he's done with teaching near the end, but my poor papa, he won't be listening to this. But I think it comes from a place with, and I will admit something here, with yoga, being in it for so long. And I think there's part of me that just wants to keep evolving and not be bound to just yoga teacher box, that I strive to continuously learn about other subjects, other topics, other arenas, other niches, other, the neuroscience thing, math, going back to school. And that's where there's a deep desire to continue to strive. And and anybody out there who's their own business owner and entrepreneur, you have to fucking hustle. So there's the natural striving that you don't have a choice. You have to keep striving to bring home the bills, or to bring home the bacon, to pay bills, etc. So it's maybe a product of my environment and my choices and my work and for sure my personality, that I like goals. I do well with, I'm a goal-oriented person.
That's good. What about you, Crystal? You got some vices?
Yeah, so I'd say I would agree with Julia, but mine goes deeper, and not in the way that yours wasn't deep. I mean deeper in the way of like it comes from trauma, or it comes from this old belief system that I am not good enough. Now I'm working on that. That's definitely like not really there anymore. But I keep striving to learn, to grow, so that I'm continuously I guess, recognized, and yes, to the relevance, but also that I'm held at this like level of, oh, she knows her shit. She's well educated in her field. Because I mean, it's not like you, which I love in India, you can get a PhD in yoga, like Swami Vishvektu did, my other teacher. But here that's not recognized, right? Like,
I think you can.
yeah, in India you can get a PhD, sure.
But remember Maeve, who we did the yoga with, and her brother has a PhD in heavy metal. Legit.
Actually?
Yeah.
Badass.
Yeah.
Like Maeve Jones?
Yeah.
Maeve?
And she's a triplet, which
Yeah.
also
Oh,
I
makes
did
her
know
extra
that.
cool.
But
I
it
love
wasn't
Maeve.
part of her triplet. It's her older brother. I think that is the doctor of heavy metal.
Okay, I'm going to look into it. Okay, well, maybe
Yeah.
I'm going to create the yoga PhD and something I'm going to strive towards.
Dude, if you make a yoga PhD program manual, you'll be like 100 years old
Oh,
before
that's
you
true.
launch
Where's
it.
Crystal? Doing her manual.
Oh, so good.
You could probably get your PhD in mantra. I think you've got,
No, there's so much still to learn.
there's always a lot to learn though, I
Much
think.
to learn. But don't you feel like to write down like the negative is, because this idea of writing down something is like, I mean, unless you like cross it out or you burn it. But from my understanding, if like you were to vocalize all the things you don't want to do, the universe doesn't hear don't. It just hears the other part of it. So it's like we're going to bring in that negativity. So to like write down all the negative stuff, unless you burn it or bury it or do something, it's still going to be like it's planting a seed where it's like the using your voice, using your affirmation, using your thoughts, because, you know, things come into fruition that way. So is there another
Yeah, I
part
don't
of
know.
that, or is it just write down, stop doing all these things?
Well, I wanted it to be pretty like broad. So it was like, stop scrolling, stop procrastinating. And so now when I notice I do stuff, I'm like, stop it.
Right.
And then to switch. But what would be like a positive cue then?
Well, the opposite of that. Like what Krishnamacharya says, like to shift the negative patterns into a new positive pattern. So instead of being like, stop doing this, instead of being like, I am going to achieve this. I don't know.
So if I notice
just
I'm
making
getting
shit up.
lost in my like Instagram feed, then like what is the signal to my brain that I am scrolling and I
Well,
am
the moment you notice that you're doing it, choose to stop doing it.
yeah,
Choice, power of choice.
power of choice. Okay, I like it. It's kind of interesting too when we're talking about like the younger generation, and I was listening to a podcast today where he's kind of saying how people will hate on technology, like the phones are like eroding our brains and this and that, and it's like, well, no, they are doing a lot of good as well, but I think it's I don't know, like having healthy boundaries like within it, so it's not controlling you. Or yeah, I am kind of scared of AI and robots taking over our lives.
Yeah, and I think that there's been a lot of new information feeding into people, you know, the publishing of Dopamine Nation and people knowing what dopamine is. And there's a lot of attention paid to how you get a dopamine hit every time you get a like and all of that. So there's that. It's really interesting to see how that neuro speak has made its way into mainstream conversation and mainstream media and mainstream social media. Most people know that dopamine is a feel-good drug. They'll reference it that way in your brain. But what people don't know is that you have a bounty of neurotransmitters that are all being stimulated and do definitely go awry when there's that excess screen time that's happening. There's a lot of different things that you can do if you have the willingness and the interest to take control of technology, but it's true, a lot of us are cornered, myself included, when your business is online, when you're, you know, your people, you have to be sending newsletters and pumping up your products, and your what you want to do and love to do requires being online and answering messages on Instagram. So even when you want to escape, you have to be on it. So there's that necessity of drawing those healthy boundaries.
I don't blink, I guess,
You don't blink.
when I'm on the computer.
Oh.
I get so hyper fixated on it, and I'm starting to go insane from it. I just had like my, cause I noticed in the summer I started to have like red eyes, and then I was talking to a homeopath and she was saying it was from probably like not blinking. And then when I got my eyes checked, he said, yeah, like my ducts aren't really working anymore. And
Oh no.
yeah, I fried myself, I think. I've been like trying to consider what to do with my life now.
Oh,
Oh,
Okay.
Like the screen is crazy, or
Yeah.
you know.
A lot of your stuff's on the computer too, like everything.
and are you desiring to be more in real life with people?
Well, that's why I really like podcasting. Yeah. And then I took a break and was like, I need to work. And so I worked, and then it was quite draining for sure. And so now, but yeah, trying to like figure out how to make things like sustainable. So I'm like doing things that nurture me
Yeah, yeah.
and aren't necessarily, you know, converting to paying my mortgage, but
Exactly.
that fill me up. It's finding like that balance always.
Yeah, it sounds like to create more of a balance in your life, more of like moderation, and like have your work hours, but then take time to go into the woods and, you know, get like
Yeah. Yeah.
things going, moving in a different direction.
Before you got here, we were talking about that. Like with me not having a dog anymore, it's like sometimes I won't actually leave the house.
Well, I was just speaking to this. I did some Instagram post on how for individuals who may not necessarily want to meditate, 90 minutes of walking the woods will calm the default mode network and will
90
soften.
minutes is a long time.
90 minutes is a long time. You could probably do it less than, but
No, it's
dog
good.
walkers in particular, in general, you probably did a bunch of walks that accumulated to
sure.
90 minutes. And King's College London, my school, they released a recent research piece that specific to the sound of chirping birds had the same kind of impact as an antidepressant when individuals listen specifically to birds chirping. It has this connection to nature.
Yeah.
Dare I say more so than wind or ocean, or for me, I love all the sounds of nature, but there's something about birds that is very like sweet little birds. And, you know, when for those of you who've traveled quite a bit, when you think about beaches or jungle, or there's something that connects us to that innate primordial part of us, right? And deep to our nervous systems.
Okay, I like it. Chirping
I love
birds.
that.
Yeah.
I think nature in general, like
Yeah,
that's like
birds,
the first thing if people are like feeling stuck. I'm like, go take a walk in the woods, like
Exactly.
because it's like it's coming back home, you know, to your natural quality and natural self.
I think it's the
Primordial.
is it the Hopi tradition or Hopi?
Hopi.
Yeah, the Hopi tradition. They think the natural antidote for depression is wake up in the morning and walk toward the sun.
Oh, of course it is.
Yeah.
I like that.
My parents got granted into the Hopi tribe.
Of course they did.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
In New Mexico. Yeah, my mom lived with them for a long time, the Hopi tribe, and that's where my mom that's where that's why she had a teepee. That's why we lived in a teepee, because it came from the Hopi tribe people that she lived with. And I have dad he's a writer as well, which is really cool, and he wrote a beautiful story about one of the ceremonies with them, going down into. There's a name for it. I don't know the name for it, but it's basically like in the desert, and then it's basically like caverns in the ground that you go down, and there's ceremonies that you go down the ladders, and there's like full ceremonies going on down there. I think drugs were involved, and my dad talked about my mom as like an antelope.
Oh boy, and there's something going down.
Vision quest.
Something's
I
going.
like
Oh yeah,
it.
definitely Vision Quest. Anyhow, my first dog, her name was Hopi.
Okay, how do we bring this back on track?
I could share some neuromyths. I just posted this on Instagram last week, so it might be a repeat. But
Good. Reinforcing.
I'll say, so listeners at home, you can listen. It's true or false. So true or false, you only use 10% of your brain.
False.
I don't know. I thought it was true.
Apparently it is true, but I'm thinking that it has to be false.
No, it's 100% false. So all of
Thank
neuroscience
God.
research would be completely in the garbage if that was true.
Oh,
so when you put someone in an fMRI machine, you can see all areas of the brain from brainstem all the way up to the cortex is being 100% used. And so it goes back to, I think is it William James? He was a philosopher, and he said something, it goes back to whatever, he was around 1920s or 30s. He said something along the lines of, we only use 10% of our potential as humans, and people it was like the nasty game of telephone, and people reworked it into we only use 10% of our brains. Then it was in Hollywood, of course, in movies and etc. It was used. And I remember believing that before I studied any of this. And I was like, oh, that makes sense that we have all this capacity. There's all this space that's not being used. It is 100% false.
Wow, that's
But-
so cool.
But do you think,
There you go.
but do you think like we have the ability to change? So when people say, oh, that is true, like we are only using 10%, do you think your brain stops working to like fulfill like that thought? I don't know.
I have a question. So then we use. So I have a question. So we use 100% of our brain.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
but so what about like people that are like telepathic and
Or-
stuff, like or
well,
that
the-
have like clairvoyance and like things like that? Because that has to be part of the brain in the way of like being able to like be mediums, and like that has to be some sort of the brain recognition of to be able to like tap in that way.
I think from a neuroscientific perspective, they would talk about something is happening in the brain where someone is having, and I hate to say it, but they would talk about delusional thinking. If somebody was hearing voices or going, they would talk about what's happening in the brain, in the whether it's an imbalance or there's something going on in the prefrontal cortex, or there's, for example, voices or hallucinations are often, like a condition that goes hand in hand with, for example, schizophrenia. So a neuroscientist, somebody not necessarily me, who is both, right, would say we would have to look at what's happening to that in terms of the brain, what's happening to the brain on that level. And then, but I hear what you're saying in terms of
Like psychics and things like that, because that's not a hallucination. But that's also talking a little bit more magic, and that's out of the box of neuroscience, I would assume.
I think that like beyond the box of neuroscience, there's a lot of things that we can explain, and I
Yet.
think that, that we
Or
have,
like, yeah.
I
But
mean,
why do we need to explain it too?
and that's
Sometimes I
just it.
wonder.
Like there's, in terms of like our brain, if we were just to isolate our central nervous system in its capacity, what I believe is that, so this is what I believe. I believe that we use 100% of our brain. However, we are limited by the conditions of our anatomy. So yes, we use 100% of our brain, but for example, there are certain species in nature that are able to see in the dark, or they can hear 100 times greater than whatever times more than humans. So because of that, we prime ourselves to be the superior species, when in fact, I would say that we aren't.
I would agree with you on that
it's
one,
a very
Jules.
egotistical way of thinking,
We're
that
good
we are the
gossips.
center of the universe, and we have definitely developed in terms of the evolution of Homo sapiens and being able to walk and do all these things and make tools and build things, etc. So we have this, ability to have consciousness and choice and free will, although that could be argued as well. But I think that when it comes down to, what we don't know is also limited inherently by our biology. So that's where what we are unable to, for example, fully understand the capacity of what is out there in our universe, for example. So we don't know it all at all. And so who is to say we still don't know everything about the brain? That's one thing I can say as well. 100% we don't know the actual capacity of our brain. So for example, since 1990, it was really the era of the brain and the era of neuroscience in the development of neuroimaging, neurotechnology, fMRI machines that look at what's happening in the brain. We understood, in the 1990s and 2000s, what is neuroplasticity? That's new. Something called neurogenesis. That's new. All of these massive understandings, the development of SSRIs, or the development of more antidepressants and antipsychotic medication, all these things. This is all new. But we still don't know so much, and we are limited inherently by our biology that we can't, through our five senses, can't possibly be seeing it all. And therein, for me, lies where potential spirit or the God molecule, we can't fully understand it because our biology limits us from seeing it. And that's what I think is, that's where anything is possible, right? And I've had crazy phenomenal things happen, and ghost experiences and spirit experiences that can't possibly be explained, that are so fucking cool, and keep me, and it keeps my hope alive, that I personally think it's depressing. If there's not more than what our eyes can see right now, then,
Yeah, it's
What
just
are
it's
we
just a
doing here?
hallucination. I'd be like, oh, for fuck's sakes.
Yeah. And we don't know.
Yeah.
Some people think that we just die and that's it, and there's
Yeah.
nothingness, but energy has to go somewhere. We do know that.
But it's like that guy, like Man's Search for Meaning, that book that was written in the Auschwitz.
Auschwitz, yeah.
And then he was just saying these people that are like living off of nothing, like they're basically just living off of hope, and that was the only differentiating factor for the people that made it and didn't make it.
Yeah.
And I think he was like a psychotherapist.
Didn't you talk about like the importance of like the clean shave? Like wasn't there something about shaving the face and like how there was like the simplest act was like something to hold on to?
Yeah, like that.
Or
Normalcy.
we talked about that around the food. Like, okay, you're eating just plain rice, and the people that's not really nourishing. But some people are like, no, this is everything that my body needs, and basically doing a prayer to the food, and then being like, okay. And those people like strived with health better than the people that didn't.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too when you can eat like the best food in the world, but if your like system is not level enough, you can't absorb anything because you're so out of whack. And
One of my teachers, Tawariji, he would say that in terms of Ayurveda, how you prepare your food, whom is preparing it, and how, the attention that is going into it. You feel when you eat angry food and you feel when you eat loving food.
Totally.
It's like
Completely,
why, a good friend or a mom or, your partner, when they make you food with love, you can feel it.
yeah.
And there is that anything that is done consciously with intention, I think is going to be all the more rich. It lands in our biology in our body
Totally.
in that embodied way.
Do you guys watch screens when you eat?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I told Adele that today was the last day we were going to do that. Tomorrow is a new day. We're going to sit at this table.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good
and,
practice.
That's a big thing is feeding people. Like that's like a foundational like root chakra. Like your foundational need is being met with food. Like everybody needs it to survive, and it's a very like comforting. It's a very beautiful gesture to feed somebody.
Oh, it's the best gift. When
Love language.
someone makes me food, I'm in love. I don't care who it is. Crystal made me a meal. I'm like, I'm in love with you. But and it's the same. It's I love making.
Yeah. What's the second neuromyth?
Okay, true or false? You can describe someone as being left-brained or right-brained. So, for example, someone who has a math brain versus an artsy, creative brain. True or false? Andrea?
Well, now I just want to say false.
False.
Shut the fuck up.
I'm pretty sure they're all going to be false.
No, no, I disagree with this.
Oh my gosh. So this is where there's someone
Tell
like,
me why. Tell me why I shouldn't.
But it's the basic teaching, all encompassing, yin yang.
so it's very true because the brain, so for example, when you're engaged in a creative activity or you're engaged in a mathematical activity, it's engaging various networks of the brain. It's not just like the left side shuts down and the right side is doing the task that's oriented to, I get the right side, left side mixed up all the time, like creative versus mathematical brain, that you can look at patterns in the brain and say for sure when someone is focusing on mathematics, they're learning math, so they will get stronger in math because they're working at the encoding that is required within the brain. If you learn anything, there's going like a specific memory task, and it doesn't necessarily but the brain is so much more messier than that. It's a messy organ, and it's an electric, if you can think of like an electric storm, right? Like that's happening when you're doing different tasks. There's no such thing as the left brain shutting down and just the right side going. Let's hear your hypothesis. little missy purse lips.
I agree with you on that in the way of like all of it's firing, one side doesn't shut off than the other. But like my sister Autumn, she's a Libra, and she's so logical and like thinks way more like so much more different than I do. And I think like, and I'm way more creative and in that like ethereal kind of realm and more like energy stuff. And she's very, it's even my husband, like very more lawyer-like. So there has to be some sort of, they're either activating that side of their brain more, or is that just a characteristic
Those are
of
traits.
them?
Yeah, I would say that we're talking about two different things. Like those are character traits, and those are, I have different strengths than you do, or vice versa to Andrea, you know? So somebody could be really 100% really strong at math, and someone could be really creative. That's very common. It's different when you would roll them into an fMRI machine and see what's happening to the brain. And so that's where there would be illogical results to that. So
the brain's firing for left and right for that creative and as well as logical. And then the other part that I'm talking about is more of those characteristics within somebody.
Yeah.
Which is very present, but it comes off that we think it's part of the brain, but that's misinformation, being like, it's not actually the brain. It's like your expression of the world, or your character of in the world.
Yeah, we have traits, we have behaviors, we have things that we absorbed as a kid, and that of course is going to show up in terms of how we navigate through the world, and then the things that we are strong at, that will show up in the brain, but it's not isolated to one side or the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like the idea of the brain like firing like a thunderstorm on all the electricals. That's so cool.
Do you think, though, that we need to, like, say if we are in industries or professions or hobbies that are just accessing one side of the brain predominantly, like, do you think then we should be engaging in the other ones to kind of keep it strong? And
Oh, for sure. And that's a whole other topic in a way. When you look at learning new things, everybody somewhat knows what neuroplasticity is. So, if, for example, like being, when things fire together, they wire together, which is kind of a blanket statement and isn't necessarily always true. But that when we learn something, we will get better at that thing that we learn, and there is a learning curve, and part of that is the energy that is required of the brain to learn something new, and that's a good thing. So 100%, I think that when it comes down to just stepping away from the neurobiology of things, when it comes down to being an evolved human and being open and not becoming rigid in the ways that we're thinking, I think that it's always a good idea to learn new things. If you're somebody who's really, really, really rigid and into the maths and into the, you want to exercise the part of you that's creative or the opposite of that, I think that's a healthy practice. And you would see then, I'm sure that there could be brain imaging studies that look at that kind of personality versus somebody who's really rigid and learning only one way.
Have you found anything in the teachings or the study that you're doing right now in neuroscience around the connection to the koshas or the nadis or the vayus, or like these energy systems that the yogis had talked about that have this like backup scientific connection to it? Like in specific, like the koshas, the nadis, the vayus. Like, has there been anything around that?
Well, something that's really cool, something that I do at the beginning of my courses, is that I'll get people to Google the nadis. And so for people listening at home, this like the nadis in yogic language are referenced as like these energetic channels from crown of head to the soles of feet, and that sometimes they go even beyond the physical body, and then some, like there are thousands of highways, and they have these interconnected like little baby chakras, and then we have the major 7 chakras. Well, if you were to pull up just like the physical map of the nadis, and then pull up the physical map of the nervous system, lymphatic system, circulatory system, it looks exactly like the nadis.
Yes, I've seen that. It's so fucking cool.
Yeah, it's exactly like the nadis.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at, okay, that's esoteric anatomy, exactly maps onto our internal anatomy and all the highways.
I forgot about that. As soon as you said the pulling up, I was like, oh my God, I see it. That image of like them coming down. So cool.
That one's the most obvious one that I teach at the beginning of my courses, my pranayama course. I'll say, well, look at this and look at this, and this is why, there's truth to that.
So cool.
Fuck yeah.
And another thing is that the chakra system, I mean, one of the basics that we know is that it perfectly aligns with endocrine organs, with the exception of the adrenals. Like the adrenals are down below, but then we see the adrenals align with the first chakra, the ovaries and testes align with the 7th chakra, the pancreas is the 3rd, the thymus gland is the 4th, the thyroid is the 5th, the pineal and the pituitary are the 6th and the 6th and the 7th. So we have these major endocrine organs that slow drip hormones into our bloodstream are in perfect alignment with the chakras.
2 things. from my teachings with in India with Vishwaji is that he went through the chakras, but he talks about the glands as well. Like he goes through, and that's part of like the chart that they speak to these things as well. The other thing, is it pineal or pineal? Because I always say pineal gland, but I've heard both.
I think it's a tomato kind of thing.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Like it's some people like so it's some people say it's because it's shaped like a pine cone, but it's not really shaped like a pine cone. Like I don't think it is. It's interesting where there's misinformation as people say it's your third eye, but when you look at the actual anatomy, it's
way back in the brain, isn't it?
It's what's called a subcortical, so deep to the limbic system, and it sits behind this kind of hub of a station called the thalamus, and it sits like a little half eye almost at the back of the thalamus gland, and then the pituitary comes off of there's a stalk of the hypothalamus and the big stalk, and then the pituitary glands are like two little, like a fisherman's string, and then the two little bobbles at the end of the string, right? Those are the pituitary. So the pineal gland isn't necessarily here at the beginning.
But I think why they're talking about that, because that's how you connect to it. Like if you do Brahmari, or you bring your focus there and you go your tongue up and you focus there, the idea is that will stimulate that energy center with the vibration. So I think that's the miscommunication. It's like not at the front, but it's that's the gateway to it, right?
Yeah.
And even like Egyptian, and they talk about like the third eye, or that eye of connecting to that was secrete, like even like the nectar of like the gods kind of thing. Like
I think it would help with the pituitary as well, because we know that the pituitary gland, like if we can, in a way, it's like at the roof of your mouth. Like if you were to go right in there, like. And in terms of the pineal gland, when you close your eyes and meditate, we know that it has to do with taking in sunlight. So when we close our eyes and shut down the visual cortex, and at the end of the day, when there's darkness, it has the one thing we do know, because the pineal gland is still a mystery within brain science, all the things that it does, but it does secrete melatonin. So at the end of the day, the pineal gland will begin to secrete melatonin into the brain to give us that feeling of fatigue. And so that's why you don't want to look at screens right before bed, because then the visual cortex says, oh, we're awake. And then it does all these magical things.
Yeah.
I wonder what happens when you're blind.
That's a great question. That's a great question.
I have no idea, but
I
I
know
know
that I don't know why I've never thought of that.
That's a great question. Yeah.
I mean, there's different types of blindness, and but
But
like
the other
blind.
but the other senses pick up too, like your hearing and your sensitivity to like other things to be able to navigate, which is really interesting, right? Like it's like a heightened sense to help you because your eyesight is gone.
Yeah.
And some people who are blind still have a sensitivity. They may be they still feel the light, they can still see shadows and light and etc. So
Completely. Yeah. So interesting. Should we do a Brahmari breath? Get into the pineal? What do you say? You say pineal?
pineal. I say a pineal.
Do you flip?
I think I flip, but I say, I say pineal,
Yeah.
like tomato. I'll say both.
Yeah. How do you say Budapest?
Budapest.
Okay.
Budapest. Why? How do you say it? Or how is the other word you've heard
Budapest.
Yeah, that's how they say it.
it? Say it again.
Budapest.
Budapest.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I get.
It's like a lot of the Sanskrit has like different little sh and slashings of the A's and things.
Chakra versus chakra.
There you go.
Oh, what do you guys
Chakra
say?
is the North Americanized version, and
No,
chakra. Oh, really?
No, but yes, definitely. And like my mom, she studies traditional Chinese medicine, and in the Chinese medicine, they say chakras.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, but that and that comes from
Chinese medicine.
Chinese medicine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But with that said, that's where I've heard it. In the West is the chakras, and then in Hinduism and yoga philosophy, it's chakras.
It's like a piece of chalk.
Chak.
Boom.
Chak. Okay.
You gonna do a
When
Brahmari?
you try to wrap it up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Take us away, Jules.
Okay. So Brahmari. Do you sometimes say Brahmari? Tomato, pineal, Brahmari.
I say Brahmari, but
I say Brahmari.
Brahmari. Okay.
Brahmari, yeah.
Brahmari breath. Okay, so we know this. It's also, we call it honey bee breath or buzzing bee breath. it is good for soothing your nervous system. So for those of you at home, please make sure you don't do this while you're driving. And so you're at home, you're maybe getting ready to go to bed, or you're dropping into a meditation practice. And yeah, and in a way it makes sense that it creates this humming sound to the roof of the mouth. So one thing you want to do is relax your jaw and relax your tongue like a little pat of butter, and bring your tongue to the roof of your mouth. And when you make the sound, you'll keep the tongue somewhat up there and pay attention to consciously directing the sound via the breath right to the mid-brow point, which in yoga it's called the Ajna chakra, or the third eye. And we could visualize it biologically as just like humming into the brain. And we know that the humming sound also stimulates the vagus nerve, which brings us back online and makes us feel safe and settled. And you just think about maybe when you're a little kid and you got lullabied to sleep, or when we hum, it's a natural response to self-soothing. So that's a little bit of behind the scenes. And so I'll demonstrate one. So it's done on the exhalation. And again, it's like the buzzing of the bee right into the middle of your brain. So you'll take a big breath in, and then tongue to the roof of the mouth. And it's a... And then you basically keep going to the very, very end. I've got
5 minutes later,
big ass lungs. So I can go for a really long time. Maybe don't go as long as me. But you basically just go for the of the om. It's less gut from the gut and more like a honey, like a buzzing bee, so more nasally sounding. So let's do just 3 of them together, and then you can keep going at home alone. Together, take a deep breath in. Dude, we're going places.
An ocean of Brahmari.
I left the room.
Did you hear the vibe at the end there? Let's go on tour.
I was really wishing I had my phone when you guys were both doing it in tandem.
Well, I thought I had big lungs. This one over here.
I know.
You know what? When I went to India, I was like, oh, I thought I could breathe. Yeah, no, I can't breathe.
yeah.
Holy fuck, those guys can breathe. It's impressive.
Right? When you see their chests, they're like big billow. Like it's like there's a pillow in front of them.
Like Iyengar, when he got older, he was
Yeah.
like all fucking
Yeah.
chest.
Ribby.
Yeah.
A lot of room for the organs.
Lots of organ room.
Well, Julia, where can people find you to take these online courses and all the bits were great things that you have to share?
Thank you for asking. Well, this April, May, I currently have a spring cohort for a meditation series. So people keep rolling over. It's been happening since last year. And that's a 2-month, 8-week journey. And it's intentionally 2 months because most neuroscience research says that after 8 weeks, that's when we see actual structural changes in the brain. So that's happening in April and May. And that's happening in March, April. And that's every morning, Monday to Friday. It's all recorded. A bunch of people also show up live. And then I've got my normal online digital studio that's 3 years going strong. Hundreds of members, lots of people still showing up live in the morning, but it's also a library of pranayama practices that are a half hour and they're all themed, and then a whole asana library as well. And then I have an actual 30-hour pranayama that's neuroscience informed, but also goes into the spiritual esoteric stuff That's happening in April and May as well. And I think it's the 5th or 6th time, but I've been running that. That's online, but it's done in bits and pieces. I've kind of worked with making it much more doable in busy life, post-pandemic world now. So that's 3 days a week, and it's 2 months in April and May. And then I probably will have way more when you're listening to this beyond the spring. And I've pretty much planned things 3 months out, and I'm constantly
In quarters.
Yeah, in quarters. And one of these days soon, I would like to put out another, whether it's like a deep dive 6-month training, or kind of like taking what I would do in a 300 hour and doing something a little different with that. But that will be coming down the pipe. Oh, and I've got one more thing called offering lots called that I'm putting out there that's more of a mentorship community, once a month, quarterly, annual membership for just anybody who's maybe not just in yoga, but the field of wellness and professionals and householders. And that's something that I'm really curious to launch as well. That's happening. It's called Resourceful, like FULL.
I like it.
And I want some guest teachers on it as well. So I might
That's
be
nice.
calling in one of you as well.
Well, I think we know who that would be.
Both of you, or both of you, not just one.
All great things. Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
This is the Daily Practice Podcast with
Crystal Borelli.
and Andrea Hellman.
Yeah, life teachings, life practices. Good luck. Om Hari Om Hari Om Hari Om.
If you want to check us out on the World Wide Web, our website is thedailypractice.life, and on there we have all kinds of resources, but we have a free full moon course. It's about an hour long. There's a yoga practice, pranayama, you'll learn a mantra as well as story time, and all taught by Crystal Borelli.
Hari Om.